Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 7, 2024. President Joe Biden condemns what he calls a ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in the United States following Hamas's attack last October 7th that killed 1,200 Israelis. The president spoke at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Days of Remembrance ceremony in the U.S. Capitol building. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona speaks out against anti-Semitism on some U.S. college campuses and is questioned about his department's investigations of these under civil rights law as he testifies before the House Education and the Workforce Committee. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and Speaker Mike Johnson meet again over her filing a motion to vacate that, if passed, would remove the Speaker from his position, and she confirms the list of changes to House rules and priorities she's asking for in exchange for not forcing that vote. The House fails to override the president's veto of a bill that would undo the National Labor Relations Board Joint Employer Status Rule, which would treat many companies as employers of contract and franchise workers for purposes of union bargaining. House passes a bill to limit the Energy Department's power to impose efficiency standards on home appliances. The IRS commissioner testifies before the House Appropriations Subcommittee overseeing his agency about closing the tax gap, the difference between taxes owed and taxes paid. Head of the Drug Enforcement Administration goes before another House Appropriations Subcommittee and is asked about Mexico's extent of cooperation in fighting fentanyl trafficking. And the Pentagon's Deputy Press Secretary gives an update on the U.S. Army soldier arrested in Russia. And Russian President Vladimir Putin is inaugurated for a fifth term. From Associated Press, President Joe Biden condemned the ferocious surge of anti-Semitism in America and around the world. His words, during a Tuesday ceremony to remember victims of the Holocaust at a time when the Hamas attack on Israel and controversy over the war in Gaza have sparked new waves of violence and hateful rhetoric toward Jews. We're at risk of people not knowing the truth, Biden said of the horrors of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews were systematically killed by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. This hatred continues to lie deep in the hearts of too many people in the world. Biden's remarks at the Capitol played out as pro-Palestinian protests, some of which have involved anti-Semitic chants and threats towards Jewish students and supporters of Israel, rock campuses across the country. That was from Associated Press. Here is part of President Biden's speech concerning U.S. college campuses.
We must give hate no safe harbor against anyone. Anyone. From the very founding, our very founding, Jewish Americans, who represent only about 2% of the U.S. population, have helped lead the cause of freedom for everyone in our nation. From that experience, we know scapegoating and demonizing any minority is a threat to every minority and the very foundation of our democracy. So in moments like this, we have to put these principles that we're talking about into action. I understand people have strong beliefs and deep convictions about the world. In America, we respect and protect the fundamental right to free speech, to debate and disagree, to protest peacefully, and make our voices heard. I understand that's America, but there is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind. Whether against Jews or anyone else. Violent attacks, destroying property, is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. And we are not a lawless country. We're a civil society. We uphold the rule of law. And no one should have to hide or be brave just to be themselves. To the Jewish community, I want you to know, I see your fear, your hurt, and your pain. Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
President Biden at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual national commemoration of the Days of Remembrance held in the U.S. Capitol building. House Speaker Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries also speaking. And Newsday's White House correspondent Laura Figueroa Hernandez writing, 3 Holocaust survivors carrying photos, mementos, recounted their memories of loved ones, then invited audience members to stand and raise black and white photos of Holocaust victims placed on their chairs. President Biden held the photo up to his chest. Story from Politico. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona condemned campus demonstrations upending colleges this spring as the top Republican on the House Education Committee called for his resignation. The House Education and the Workforce Committee Chair, Virginia Foxx, Republican from North Carolina, once again pressed Cardona to step down over his response to anti-Semitism and campus demonstrations, which have led to hundreds of arrests at universities around the nation. That was from Politico. C-SPAN covered this hearing. Here is Congressman Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan, asking Secretary Cardona about his department's investigations of discrimination on college campuses.
As of this morning, the Department of Education's website listed 145 open investigations based on shared ancestry under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. On average, let me ask this question, on average, how long does it take the Office of Civil Rights to conclude Title VI shared ancestry investigations, on average?
Thank you. So the anti-Semitism and shared ancestry cases have increased. We've had over 100 since the attacks on October 7th.
145 as of this morning.
Right, but just since October 7th. So we have 145 open cases. On average, it's hard to give an average because every case is different, but roughly 6 to 8 months.
Currently, how many investigators does the Department of Education have on Columbia's campus?
I cannot comment specifically on one case, but I can tell you that we have investigators looking into the cases that we have open, which is why, sir, we're asking for an increase. We have approximately 60 less investigators than we did in 2009 and triple the number of cases.
Well, then it ought to be easy to tell me how many investigators you have on Columbia's campus, on UCLA's campus, on George Washington's campus.
I'm sure you know, sir, I cannot speak on open cases. What I can tell you is that we're taking these cases very seriously. We condemn anti-Semitism and any forms of hate on campus, and we're moving as quickly as we can. Your support of our budget proposal, sir, would help us move that along.
Well, let me go this direction then. How many investigations has the department closed? And how many of those investigations have resulted in resolutions and policy changes? We can't comment on the investigations that are open. Right. How many have we closed?
Right. There have been 2 cases that have been closed around anti-Semitism.
2 cases?
Correct, 2 cases. And we are vigorously attending to the open cases now. As you know, when Congress passed this regulation here, or this law, we have to make sure that we're negotiating with universities on a compliance and how they're going to address the issue.
Well, you know, as I understand it, the Office of Civil Rights Case Processing Manual indicates that the Office of Civil Rights has the authority to launch its own investigations. It can launch that with your own decision-making process. You don't have to wait for specific complaints. Have you launched any proactive investigations into anti-Semitism?
What I can tell you is, as recently as this morning, we have provided guidance to all colleges, not just the ones where we might have issues. So Friday, I sent communication to over 5,000 university leaders. This morning, we have a letter. And
so you haven't launched any investigations?
We have, as I said earlier, 145 open cases, which we're woefully understaffed to handle the existing cases, and I'm asking for a budget increase so that we can continue to get to those cases, sir.
Well, let me put it this way. Will you commit to launching compliance reviews of campuses within the next 30 days?
We have a process where we're providing information to campuses. We've done more in the last 6-7 months than the previous administration has done in 4 years.
It's not working. It's not working.
If you fund
from
us,
what we've
sir,
seen in the last 2 weeks. You know, I appreciate the fact that the University of Michigan did not negotiate, ended up going on with their commencement, speaking parochially here, but Jewish students are still in fear of their lives and their academic success on that campus and many other campuses. And the opportunity that you have to launch these reviews, you have solely. It doesn't take Congress or anyone else to ask you. I certainly hope you'll make this a priority, because it's for the future and present of students and universities and colleges under your priority supervision.
Congressman Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan, questioning Education Secretary Miguel Cardona at today's Education in the Workforce Committee hearing on the department's fiscal year 2022 budget request. More from the Politico article on this hearing. The Education Department is asking for $162 million, a $22 million increase for its civil rights arm, which the department says would largely help the Office for Civil Rights investigate the increase in Title VI complaints that the agency is receiving. Secretary Cardona saying antisemitism is discrimination and is prohibited by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. From CNN, the White House said Tuesday that a close reading of Israel and Hamas's separate negotiating positions on a ceasefire for a hostage deal suggests that both sides should be able to strike an agreement. CIA Director Bill Burns was in Cairo, Egypt for continued discussions Tuesday after Hamas on Monday accepted a ceasefire proposal, but which Israel said was far from meeting its demands. That was from CNN. A White House spokesperson, John Kirby, briefed reporters about this and the latest fighting in Gaza.
I know you've all seen the reports coming out of Rafah. So we're going to, of course, as I did yesterday, refer to the Israeli Defense Force, speak to their operations. But what we've been told by our Israeli counterparts is that this operation last night was limited and designed to cut off Hamas's ability to smuggle weapons and funds into Gaza. Now, our views on Rafah have remained the same. We've repeatedly and consistently expressed those views about a major operation in Rafah in densely populated areas that would give higher risk to civilians and civilian casualties. President Biden made that very clear yesterday when he spoke to Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I said yesterday, and we're going to be monitoring this situation very, very closely to see how it unfolds. We're also working hard to ensure the uninterrupted flow of humanitarian assistance, to include the immediate reopening of the Rafah crossing and Kerem Shalom for humanitarian assistance. Israel has committed to reopen Kerem Shalom at President Biden's request, and we need to see it happen soon. Now, on the hostage talks, without getting into too much detail, it remains our top priority, of course, to reach a ceasefire agreement that will lead to the release of the hostages and that will allow a surge of humanitarian assistance in. Talks are starting again today in Cairo. As I think you all know, Bill Burns will be representing us there, and a close assessment of the two sides' positions suggests that they should be able to close the remaining gaps. And we're going to do everything we can to support that process and achieve that outcome.
John Kirby is White House National Security Communications Advisor, opening up a news conference online, audio only. Back to the CNN article, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Israel's operation in Gaza will continue until Hamas is eliminated in Rafah and the entire Gaza Strip, or until the first hostage returns. Gallant said that Israel was ready to make compromises to bring the hostages home, but if this option is removed, we will go and deepen the operation across the entire Gaza Strip. From the Navy Times, Russian officials on Tuesday said an American soldier being held will remain in jail for at least 2 more months while authorities review the theft charges against him. Staff Sergeant Gordon Black, who has served in the Army since 2008, was arrested by Russian police on May 2nd after traveling from his South Korean base to the Russian city, which sits near the country's border with North Korea. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said American officials are working to provide him consular assistance. He did not say whether U.S. officials view the arrest as politically motivated. That was the reporting by the Navy Times. The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh also gave some more information on this case at her news conference.
Can you give us an update on the soldier who's being held in Russia? Do you have a sense, apparently there's like a July 2nd either trial or some sort of date. Do you have some sort of sense of what's happening there? If you could just fill in the blanks. And do you know, is it a violation of a regulation of some sort? Does he face disciplinary action because he did not seek or receive authorization for the international travel, if that's clear? And then I have a quick follow-up.
Okay, so I'll start with this, and then happy to take your additional questions. So for more information, I would refer you to the Army, but what I can tell you from here is that Staff Sergeant Gordon C. Black enlisted in the U.S. Army as an infantryman and was enlisted as an infantryman in 2008. He was most recently assigned to 8th Army, U.S. Forces Korea at Camp Humphreys in the Republic of South Korea. On April 10th, Black outprocessed from 8th Army and signed out on permanent change of station to leave en route to Texas. However, instead of returning to the U.S., Black flew from Korea through China and then to Vladivostok, Russia, for personal reasons. As of right now, Black is currently in a pretrial detention facility. It's my understanding he will remain there until his next hearing, and I'm not sure on that date. I'd refer you to State Department on that. The Army has opened an administrative investigation to determine the facts and the circumstances surrounding his travel. But to your question on, will there be consequences for his actions? That's something that the Army is going to look into through their investigation. But official or any leave to Russia is strictly prohibited, and that's pursuant to the DoD Foreign Clearance Guide, which of course is also informed by the State Department guidelines, which right now I believe that is at I believe it's Category 4, which is do not travel to Russia. So that's the sort of overview of where things stand right now.
Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh at her news conference at the Pentagon. The Russian national anthem performed in the Kremlin in Moscow today. New York Times writes that Vladimir Putin was inaugurated for a 5th term as president on Tuesday in a ceremony filled with pageantry and a televised church service, as the Russian leader tried once again to depict his invasion of Ukraine as a religiously righteous mission that is part of, quote, our 1,000-year history. Mr. Putin took the presidential oath. He swore to respect and safeguard the rights and freedoms of man and citizen with his hand on a red-bound copy of Russia's constitution, the 1993 document that guarantees many of the democratic rights that he has spent much of his 25-year rule rolling back. That was from the New York Times. During his speech, President Putin spoke about relations with the United States and other Western countries.
We have been open and we will be open to anyone who is ready to become an honest partner to our country. And we are not even refusing the dialogue with Western countries. And we will see whether they will continue to try to halt the development of our country and continue putting pressure on our country, or they will look for ways of cooperating with us. Security and strategic stability dialogues are possible, but they are possible only on the basis of equal positions. We will be working with other sovereign centers of development, and we will continue building a multipolar world.
Russian President Vladimir Putin at his inauguration in Moscow. That interpretation from Sky News. If he serves another full 6-year term, he'll be the longest-serving ruler of Russia since Empress Catherine the Great in the 18th century. Another line from the New York Times article about this inauguration. Mr. Putin claimed his 5th term in March in a rubber stamp election that Western nations dismissed as a sham. In Washington, D.C., members of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia, and Thomas Massie, Republican of Kentucky, met again with Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, discussing Congresswoman Greene's promise to call a vote on a motion to vacate to remove the Speaker, although it has become clear in the past week that the motion would not likely get a majority of the House to support it, and it would fail. Politico reports that Congressman Massie showed up at their meeting yesterday with a list of demands that included no further aid for Ukraine, a return to the Hastert rule, meaning no legislation is brought to a vote without support from a majority of the House majority, defunding the special counsel probes into Donald Trump in upcoming appropriations, and enforcement of the Massie rule, whereby government funding is automatically cut across the board if no superseding agreement is reached before a set deadline. That was from Politico. Congresswoman Greene spoke to reporters before today's meeting.
I wasn't going to talk about the things that I had spoken with Speaker Johnson about, but since they actually got leaked, and I'm wondering, I don't know if they came out of his office or not, yeah, I think I can talk about them. These are very reasonable requests, especially given that we have a Republican majority. And the American people gave us a Republican majority because they're fed up with the Democrat policies. Asking for the Hastert rule is the right thing to do for my conference. The majority should support the bills that are voted for on the floor. Also, demanding no more money for Ukraine. That is the right thing to do, and it also obeys the majority of the majority. Also asking for no more special counsels. Look, you guys, we saw Robert Mueller and the Russia collusion witch hunt. These are political. We're watching what Jack Smith has done. The FBI tampered with evidence and made this look completely fake with the documents. And now Jack Smith has lied in court. This is political, and the Department of Justice should never serve as the campaign arm of Joe Biden's administration and his campaign. This is wrong. President Trump is our presidential candidate. He is being abused, and the American people are fed up with it. It is absolutely the right thing to do to end the special counsel. These requests are not complicated, and also demanding that we have a 1% cut in our budget is the right thing to do for the American people who are over $34 trillion in debt. These are not unreasonable requests. These are the right things to do. These are the right things to do for our conference. And our Republican speaker who ran through the Democrat agenda should be able to get it done since we're a Republican-controlled conference.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, outside Speaker Johnson's office before their meeting today. This morning, Speaker Johnson answered reporters' questions at a news conference about his ongoing meetings.
Some of your GOP colleagues have asked, why are you even negotiating with MTG? She's trying to remove you. Why are you entertaining her demands? I think if John Boehner were still here, he might have called her a legislative terrorist. So, can you talk a little bit about why you decided to sit down?
Well, let me address it. So yesterday I met at some length with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey. It was a good discussion. I thought it was productive. We'll visit again today. It's not a negotiation, okay? This is how I've operated as Speaker. I committed to do it before I became Speaker, and we've been doing this for the last 6 months. I reminded my conference of this just within the last hour. Everybody knows I have lengthy discussions, detailed discussions on a daily basis with members across the conference. There are 217 of us. It takes a lot of time. This is why I don't get enough sleep these days. But what it's required when you have the smallest majority in history is that you have to quite literally get everyone to work together. When you can only lose one vote on a party preference or priority, it takes a lot of time to build consensus. And so what I do every day, Scott, is almost on an hourly basis, is I hear suggestions and ideas and thoughts from members. My door has been open from day one. Everybody knows that. I mean, I spend endless hours at this. There's nothing unusual about this. I've heard Marjorie and Thomas's ideas, just like I have every day for the last 6 months, heard others. And I reminded the conference this morning, everybody has the same opportunity to do that. It's not a negotiation at all. What we're trying to do, and what my job is to every day improve processes, procedures, our policy preferences, our legislation, and make sure that we can build the right consensus to get everybody together. It takes an inordinate amount of time and a lot of patience to do that in a time like this, but I'm committed to it, and we're going to continue to do that. So I take Marjorie's ideas and Thomas's and everybody else's equally, and we assess them on their own value, and where we can make improvements and changes and all of that we do, and that's what this is. There's nothing more than that going on. Yeah, thank you.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference this morning. There was another meeting among him and Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congressman Tom Massey in the afternoon. And then The Hill reported that last week, Congresswoman Greene said she would absolutely force her motion to vacate proposal to the floor this week, citing Johnson's track record of working across the aisle with President Biden on major legislation. But on Tuesday, after huddling with the Speaker for more than 3 hours over 2 days, Greene backed off that threat, saying she would not commit to moving her resolution to the floor before week's end. We'll see, Greene said when asked if she would make good on her previous ultimatum. it's up to Mike Johnson. The Hill article notes the shifting strategy came after Greene spoke by phone on Sunday with former President Trump, the presumptive GOP presidential nominee, who has gone out of his way to show his support for the embattled Johnson amid Greene's ouster threat. That was from The Hill. The federal indictment of Congressman Henry Cuellar, Democrat from Texas, and his wife Imelda was the subject of a news conference today with the House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California. The Cuellars are charged with taking bribes to promote a petroleum company owned by the country of Azerbaijan and also a bank in Mexico. The two have pleaded not guilty and have been released on bond. A reporter asked Congressman Aguilar about this case compared to the indictment of former Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York.
Many of your fellow Democrats pushed for George Santos to either to resign or expel, given his legal issues. You've not done the same for Congressman Cuellar after he was indicted this week. Why is there a different standard for him?
This is an incredibly serious issue. It's not lost on House Democrats how serious this is. Representative Cuellar has done the right thing in stepping down from his committees, stepping down from his positions as Chief Deputy Whip and ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee. He's entitled to make his defense. He is entitled to the presumption of innocence. That we look forward to that process playing out. And just like every American, he's entitled to that presumption. I think that's the overwhelming feeling of House Democrats at this point.
House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California at a news conference. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. The U.S. House today failed to override President Biden's veto of a resolution that tried to block a National Labor Relations Board rule that, as Bloomberg Law explains it, lowers the bar for whether two companies are joint employers sharing obligations to negotiate with unions, as well as joint liability for labor violations. In his veto statement, President Biden wrote, "I am proud to be the most pro-union, pro-worker president in American history. I make no apologies for my administration protecting the right to organize and bargain collectively." Overriding a presidential veto needs a 2/3 majority vote in the House and Senate. The vote in the House was 214 to 191, short of that 2/3. Here's some of the House floor debate before that vote. Bob Good, Republican from Virginia, in favor of overriding the veto.
The message from the administration is clear. Franchise businesses are not welcome partners in the Biden economy. In fact, the Biden administration wants to return to the harm done during the Obama-Biden administration when this rule was first in effect and cost the economy more than $30 billion and nearly 400,000 jobs on an annual basis for the 5-year period until President Trump, thankfully, reversed the rule. Of course, it also benefited the Democrats' favorite trial lawyers when lawsuits against franchise businesses increased by 93%. The joint employer rule overturns legal precedent that was in place from 1984 to 2015. It is a direct attack on the thousands of small businesses that make up the healthy and growing franchise sector. Currently, a business is considered an employer only if they exercise direct and immediate control over an employee's essential terms and conditions of employment. However, the new rule establishes that 2 or more businesses are joint employer relationships if one employer merely exercises indirect control over another company's employees. Under this standard, something as simple as a franchisor giving a franchisee a company handbook could be interpreted as exercising indirect control. Changing the definition of who controls a business creates confusion and threatens the independence of so many successful small business owners.
Congressman Bob Good, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor. Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat, also from Virginia, opposed overriding the president's veto. That is, he supported the existing NLRB rule.
Workers should be able to negotiate for higher pay, better benefits, and safer workplaces through their unions. But regrettably, this is not the case for millions of Americans, including janitors, housekeepers, cooks, and many others who are employed through subcontractors or temp agencies. The rise of what's called the fissured workplace, where firms increasingly use overlapping arrangements of contracting, subcontracting, and temping, that has weakened workers' bargaining power and allowed large corporations to evade bargaining obligations and liabilities. For example, if an employer has a subcontract, if an employee of a subcontractor were to unionize, the subcontractor could be unable to actually bargain over pay, hours, workplace safety, and other issues. That's because the actual contract is with the prime contractor, who essentially sets the terms and conditions of employment for the employee, and the subcontractor is just administering the terms of that contract. Bargaining with the subcontractor becomes essentially useless because the subcontractor is paid based on assumed wages, and they don't have the ability to change those wages. The prime contractor needs to be at the table if they're going to negotiate wages at all. Additionally, by evading bargaining obligations, the prime contractor was actually setting some or all of the terms and conditions of work, can actually shift liability for unfair labor practices onto the subcontractor or temp agency. Mr. Speaker, the NLRB's new rule fixes the problem by ensuring that workers can negotiate with all entities who actually control the working conditions. This also protects small businesses from being held liable for labor violations that are a result of larger firms' actions. And this isn't about franchising. No franchisor has ever been found to be a joint employer under any of the various joint employer rules, including this one.
Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia, ranking member on the Education and the Workforce Committee, today on the House floor before the vote on overriding the president's veto of a bill that would overturn the NLRB rule. And the vote was 214 to 191, 9 Democrats joining the Republicans in voting yes. It was a majority, but short of the 2/3 needed under the Constitution to override the veto. And because the vote failed in the House, the Senate will not be voting on this. Back to the Bloomberg Law article, the veto comes as the administration tries to salvage the regulation, which was struck down in March by a federal court in Texas. The board is considering its options to keep the rule alive, including potentially refusing to acquiesce to the judge's ruling outside of his district, the Eastern District of Texas. The U.S. House today passed a bill titled Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act, which, according to the official summary, would allow the Energy Department to change energy conservation standards for certain consumer products other than automobiles, such as household appliances, if they are technologically feasible and economically justified. The sponsor, Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, Republican from Arizona.
The Biden administration has waged a war on American energy, and this war has made its way into Americans' homes. President Biden and the Department of Energy Secretary Granholm have sacrificed appliance affordability and reliability in their pursuit of a radical rush to green agenda. In the name of energy efficiency, the Biden administration has issued rules on home appliances that would drive up costs and make these popular products less reliable and available to the American families. The Biden administration's new rules do not save a significant amount of energy and are not cost-effective. The Biden administration's rules discourage the use of natural gas in favor of the electrification of appliances, regardless of the cost, reliability, or availability. Just look how they tried to ban gas stoves before my Save Our Gas Stoves legislation and public outcry dialed it back. House Republicans are leading to protect Americans from federal mandate that increase costs, fail to result in significant energy savings, and are not practical, and eliminate the performance features of product choices. My legislation, H.R. 6192, the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act, fights back against the Biden administration's radical agenda and will preserve the affordability, availability, and quality of the household appliances Americans rely on every day.
Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, Republican from Arizona, on the House floor. Opposing the bill, Congressman Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey.
This bill is just the latest in the Republicans' polluter over people agenda that will drive up annual energy costs on hardworking American families. Now, this bill is a blatant attempt by House Republicans to derail the successful and effective energy conservation program. Energy efficiency standards save Americans money on their energy bills. They boost innovation by modernizing appliances for the future, and they reduce greenhouse gas pollution in our ongoing efforts to combat the climate crisis. American families, Mr. Speaker, are already saving up to $500 a year on utility bills thanks to the energy efficiency standards that are already in place. And the Biden administration has been busy with additional actions that will collectively save Americans $1 trillion over the next 30 years. $1 trillion. Setting energy efficiency standards is something that the Department of Energy is required by Congress to do. The Biden administration has been busy acting because the previous Trump administration refused to do its job and neglected to finalize 25 appliance efficiency standards. Now, H.R. 6192 takes an axe to energy conservation standards. It slows down the standard-setting process. It allows future administrations to revoke existing standards and ban states from setting their own conservation standards. If this bill were to become law, manufacturers will be faced with market uncertainty and a regulatory about-face every time the government changes hands. And that's problematic for future innovation, particularly considering that many of the efficiency standards finalized by the Department of Energy were reached through consensus recommendations made by appliance manufacturers and efficiency advocates.
Congressman Frank Pallone, Democrat from New Jersey, ranking member on the Energy and Commerce Committee, on the House floor as the House voted to pass this bill. Vote was 212 to 195. Mostly party lines, 7 Democrats voting yes, along with the Republicans. It now goes over to the Senate. And an update on what's happening in the Senate. This from Punchbowl News. Leaders there are getting increasingly pessimistic about the prospects of passing the 5-year FAA reauthorization bill by the end of the week, with intra-party spats and ongoing demands for amendment votes standing in the way of a time agreement. It could lead Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to proceed with yet another extension of the FAA's existing authority to prevent a lapse on Friday at midnight. That extension, if needed, could last until the beginning of the next Congress, according to Senate aides. That reporting by Punchbowl News. Wall Street today, the Dow up 31, NASDAQ down 16, S&P up 6. The leader of the Internal Revenue Service, writes the National Desk, appeared in front of a House committee on Tuesday to defend the agency's budget as the Republican majority in control of the chamber has tried multiple times to cut its new funding as it tries to modernize and become more efficient to enforce an increasingly complicated tax code. IRS Commissioner Daniel Werfel has made several pleas to lawmakers to leave the agency's budget intact as it tries to enforce the tax laws that are on the books and improve what had become putrid customer service for Americans trying to ask questions about filing their taxes. That was the reporting by the National Desk. Here's some of that hearing. Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, asking Commissioner Werfel about the tax gap.
How much revenue that is owed to the federal government under the laws that we have passed, not being paid because of a lack of enforcement, which is both a direct loss and an indirect loss. A direct loss by the money we don't, and an indirect cost by people who believe that they're not going to be checked anyway, so they will either go very close to the line or over the line.
Congressman, we refer to that as the tax gap. It's the difference between the balance owed versus the balance paid, and we estimate it to be $687 billion a year.
$687 billion.
Yes.
Per year.
Per year.
Does the current request of the administration anticipate, with the enforcement money that you have from IRA and that are requested, will that make a significant dent in that gap?
We believe it will. We had at the point of the Inflation Reduction Act, right, the day before it was enacted, the most anemic audit rates that we've had, essentially in IRS history. Now, what we're doing with these funds is increasing our ability to enforce, in particular, on high wealth and complex filers. One reflection that I've shared before is on the day the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, we had one auditor for every 150 of the top tier most wealthy taxpayers in the country. I'm not talking about just like 10 million or more in income or assets. I'm talking about 250 million, the topmost tier. So one auditor for each 250. Many of these tax returns are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pages long. So I tell people to picture that one auditor like backing in trucks and trucks full of tax returns, and it's them against that, all of that. And what we need to do is not only hire more people, but provide them technology, data analytics, and subject matter expertise to unpack all that complexity. We are leaving a lot of money on the table.
The statistic I have, and I showed last year, was that from 2010 to 2019, those fiscal years, IRS audits of millionaires plummeted from approximately 9% plus to less than 0.5%. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Again, I'll make it clear, nobody wants people to pay more taxes than they owe. And we set
neither does the IRS.
But to the extent that they do not pay, somebody has to take up the slack, or we create a debt.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, questioning the IRS Commissioner Daniel Werfel at today's House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing about the IRS budget for fiscal year 2025. You heard reference to IRA, that's Inflation Reduction Act, which provided the IRS with $80 billion. The Drug Enforcement Administration account on X posting, "Today is National Fentanyl Awareness Day. Illegal fentanyl is a significant factor behind the recent surge in U.S. drug overdose fatalities." At the same time, the DEA Administrator Ann Milgram testified about her agency's budget proposal before another House Appropriations Subcommittee. The chair, Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky, asked her about efforts to stop fentanyl from crossing the U.S.-Mexico border.
With so much fentanyl flowing across our southern border from Mexico, and all the new limitations Mexico has placed on DEA, how would you respond to Americans who view our counter-fentanyl efforts as a war and the Mexican government complicit with the cartels?
What I say often, Congressman, is right now we're in a fight to save American lives, and this is as significant a fight as I think we've ever seen. You've heard me say this before, but we are losing the same number of Americans every 11 days that we lost on 9/11. So it would be impossible for me to overstate how important it is that we all be working together to stop this threat, and it is a grave threat, I believe, to the United States.
I understand that since being confirmed and assuming the role of administrator of DEA in June of 21, you've been unable to meet with a single Mexican government counterpart. Is that true?
I met with Attorney General Gertz, the head of the Attorney General for Mexico. I met with him in 2021, I believe in the fall of 2021, at the Department of Justice.
How can we sincerely believe the Mexican government is a partner in our counter-drug efforts when they won't even meet with the head of our Drug Enforcement Administration?
I understand the challenges that we face are grave, and again, Congressman, we stand ready to partner and work with any foreign counterpart that's willing to join us in this fight to save lives.
Well, I want to tell you that for one member of Congress, I think you're doing a whale of a good job under the most difficult of circumstances without any support from your superior functions in the government. They're not giving you the weapons that you need, nor the support that you have to have. And we will tackle that problem here in the subcommittee.
Congressman Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky, chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the Drug Enforcement Administration, and testifying about the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025, which begins in October. Administrator Ann Milgram. Congressman Rogers also talked about Mexico not securing visas for DEA agents to operate in Mexico in a timely fashion. The U.S. House today passed a bill that would rename a post office in Purcellville, Virginia, in honor of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who lived nearby. The vote was 371 to 28, with 3 members voting present. Debate on the bill was Monday and included the sponsor, Jennifer Wexton, Democrat of Virginia, who used a text-to-speech app.
Mr. Speaker, last year I was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. PSP makes it very difficult for me to speak, and I use an assistive app so that you and our colleagues can understand me. I am proud to be here today speaking in support of my bill to rename the Purcellville, Virginia Post Office, in honor of my former constituent, the late Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who chose not to have her mail delivered to her rural western Loudoun County farm, but instead became a fixture at the post office that will bear her name. Secretary Albright was a fearless trailblazer for women and a devoted public servant who touched the lives of so many whom she taught, mentored, and worked with, including me. Her relentless defense of democracy and advocacy for human rights, inspired by her own lived experience fleeing Nazi persecution, made her an icon here at home and around the globe. It is my honor to lead this legislation to celebrate her historic life and legacy here in Virginia's 10th Congressional District, where her farm is located, and where she spent as much time as she was able. Secretary Albright once said the greatest honor of her life was representing the United States of America, a sentiment I am sure we all share as members of the House of Representatives.
Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor on Monday, speaking through an app. Her bill passed today overwhelmingly. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.